In the quiet suburb of Richmond Hills outside Philadelphia, with its beautiful tree-lined streets, Amy Watson's story begins. Amy was a dedicated nurse at Pennsylvania Hospital. Her kindness and compassion were highly valued by her patients, and she greeted them with a smile every day, easing their anxieties. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. How are you feeling today?" Amy asked in a gentle voice. "Amy, I'm so glad to see you. Hospital life isn't so bad when you're around," the elderly patient smiled back. Amy had been married for 3 years to Richard Watson, who taught history at the local high school. Richard was a reserved, intellectual man who drove an old car and seemed to live a modest life. One evening during dinner, Richard gently embraced Amy from behind. "How was your day?" "Busy but fulfilling. How about yours? How's the preparation for your new history class coming along?" Amy kissed her husband on the cheek. "Good. I'm thinking about a new approach to teaching the Civil War. I want the students to read actual letters from that time so they can understand people's experiences." There was deep affection between them, but their life held a secret. Richard came from a wealthy family, but he had hidden this fact. He had chosen to live by his own means rather than rely on his family's fortune, and he hadn't revealed this even to Amy. Meanwhile, Amy's mother Martha was a cold, controlling woman who worked at a local real estate company. Having won a beauty pageant in her youth, Martha was strongly fixated on appearances and social status. "Victoria, that new necklace is lovely. Did Jason buy it for you?" Martha's eyes narrowed at her daughter's jewelry. "Yes, it's to celebrate his latest courtroom victory." "He's so generous," Amy's sister Victoria answered proudly. She managed an upscale boutique and had married Jason, a local attorney, 2 years ago. They had recently had a daughter, Lily, who had just turned 1. "You've made such a good marriage." "Just as I expected," Martha said with satisfaction. Victoria was obsessed with portraying a perfect family image on social media, and her posts always gathered hundreds of likes. "Perfect. This filter will really make Lily's eye color pop. This will be a hit on Instagram for sure," she murmured, staring intently at her screen. Amy was constantly criticized by her mother and sister, and often overlooked at family gatherings. One day, when visiting Martha's house, she received a cold welcome. "Oh, Amy. You're still wearing that dress. Didn't you wear the same one last Christmas?" Martha snickered. "I like it, Mom," Amy answered in a small voice. "Amy, is Richard still teaching at that little school? No talk of promotion?" Victoria asked condescendingly. "He loves teaching. He values fulfillment, not money." "Oh, I see. That's why you're still living in that tiny house," Victoria's words carried obvious contempt. Amy and Richard had been trying to have a child for 2 years. After experiencing several miscarriages, Amy finally had a stable pregnancy, and the doctor told her she was expecting twins. That night in their bedroom, Amy told Richard with tears in her eyes, "Richard, finally, our baby, no, our babies." "Oh, Amy." Richard embraced his wife. "You've been so strong. We'll get through this together." "But I have to tell Mom and Victoria. I'm afraid of their reaction," Amy said anxiously. "No matter what your mother and sister say, our children will be loved," Richard promised. That weekend, they were tense in the car on the way to Martha's house. "Ready?" Richard asked gently. "Yes, but honestly, I'm nervous. Mom has always criticized my life choices. This time too." "It's okay. We have happy news. If they're not happy for us, it doesn't matter. This is our family, our joy." That weekend, A party was being held at Martha's house to celebrate Lily's first birthday. Pink and gold balloons decorated the exterior of the colonial-style house. Dozens of cars filled the parking area, and a festive atmosphere was already in the air. About 20 relatives and friends had gathered in the living room, engaged in lively conversation. The table was loaded with typical American family dishes: roast beef, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and Martha's famous apple pie. When Amy and Richard arrived, Victoria greeted them with a perfunctory smile. "Finally, you're here. Everyone has already started eating." Amy handed Lily a small gift. "Happy birthday, Lily. I picked this out especially for you." The small box wrapped with a pink ribbon contained a wooden toy. Lily laughed innocently and reached for the present. Victoria intercepted it, saying, "Oh, that's cute. But Lily needs something more sophisticated," and promptly set the box aside. Amy took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen. Martha was boiling water in a large pot for pasta. "Mom, can I help?" Amy offered. "It's fine. You don't need to do anything." As usual, Martha replied coldly, hurting Amy. Amy silently returned to the dining room. At the table, Victoria and Jason dominated the conversation. "Jason won a big case last week," Victoria boasted. "So we decided to buy a new BMW. And we're planning a trip to Italy this summer. We're going to take Mom with us." "Oh, how wonderful," one of the relatives exclaimed. "You two are really successful." Amy ate quietly, and Richard gently held her hand. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Amy smiled and nodded, but her eyes looked sad. When dessert time came, the lights were dimmed. Martha carried in an elaborate cake with lit candles. Everyone sang, "Happy Birthday," and Lily sat in her high chair, delightedly watching the flame on the cake. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a special moment." Martha stood up and raised her glass. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my precious granddaughter Lily's special day. Victoria and Jason are wonderful parents, and Lily is the best grandchild I could hope for. She is the future of our family, our pride." As everyone applauded, Amy and Richard exchanged glances. Amy took a deep breath and nodded to Richard. "It's time," she whispered. "Actually, we have an announcement to make." Amy nervously stood up. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to her. "Richard and we're expecting twins. Early next year, Lily will have 2 cousins." A momentary silence dominated the room. Then, Amy could see disgust creeping onto Victoria's face and Martha's eyes widening with anger. "Oh, is that so?" Martha said without changing her tone. "Your sister's child is barely 1 year old, and you're trying to spoil that." "Mom, what are you saying?" Amy asked in confusion. She could feel her heart racing as she sensed the tension in the room. "It's obvious." Martha's voice rose. "Victoria and Jason's child should be the center of the family, but you're trying to steal the spotlight. You've always been like that. Always inadequate, always jealous, always trying to prove something." Tension filled the room. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes. Amy felt her face growing hot. "Martha, please stop," Richard said in a quiet but firm voice. He stood up and placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. "This isn't about taking away from Lily's day. We just wanted to share our good news with the family." "Family?" Martha scoffed. "What would a bottom-feeder teacher like you know? Victoria's husband is a successful lawyer, and Lily has a bright future. What will your children become? People who struggle with money their whole lives, like you?" "Enough." Richard raised his voice. The anger that had been hidden beneath his calm exterior was surfacing. Martha headed to the kitchen and picked up the large pot of boiling pasta water. There was a gleam of anger and contempt in her eyes. She slowly walked toward Amy. It took the people in the room a few seconds to understand what was happening. Your sister's child is enough. Nobody wants your children, don't bring more trash into this world. Martha screamed. Her face was contorted with rage. Amy was frozen with fear. The guests around them stood still, as if frozen. Just as Richard stepped forward to protect his wife, Martha tilted the pot forward. We don't need you. The boiling water splashed onto Amy's abdomen. Amy's scream echoed throughout the house. She collapsed in panic and pain, screaming as she felt her skin burning through her clothes. She instinctively curled up to protect her abdomen, but the hot water had already flowed down to her thighs. Amy! Richard rushed to his wife. He took off his jacket and tried to place it on her wounds. Someone call an ambulance. Now! His voice cracked with fear and anger. While the people in the room panicked, Victoria put her arm around Martha's shoulders, a satisfied smile on her face. You finally got what you deserved, she said quietly. Amy began to lose consciousness from the intense pain. Through her blurring vision, the last thing she saw was her husband's terrified face and the cold, satisfied expressions of Victoria and Martha. Richard, the babies. Amy said in a faint voice. Her consciousness was gradually fading. In the distance, the sound of approaching ambulance sirens could be heard. Richard gently cradled Amy, sending a cold look toward Martha and Victoria. In his eyes was a determination they had never seen before. A doctor's voice echoed in the hospital corridor giving instructions. Paramedics carried Amy in on a stretcher. Richard held her hand tightly, desperately following them. Sir, please wait here, a nurse said in a kind but firm tone. We need to begin treatment immediately. We'll update you on her condition as soon as possible. Richard collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, holding his head in his hands. His hands were shaking, and his face showed a mixture of fear and anger. He took out his smartphone and dialed a number. Uncle Robert. I need your help urgently, he spoke in a low voice. Yes, my wife, it's an emergency. Can you come to Philadelphia from Boston right away? Hours later, Amy woke up in the intensive care unit at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. Her abdomen and thighs were covered in bandages, and an N4 was connected to her arm. The room was dimly lit, and it was already night outside. She could see Richard sleeping in a chair. Richard! Amy called out in a hoarse voice. Richard jumped up and took her hand. Amy! I'm so glad you're awake. I'll call the doctor. Wait, the babies? Amy asked in a trembling voice. Richard smiled reassuringly. They're fine. Both of them. The doctor said that thanks to your clothes absorbing most of the heat, there was minimal direct damage to the babies. Amy sighed with relief, and tears streamed down her face. Thank goodness, thank goodness. The doctor entered the room and checked Amy's condition. Mrs. Watson, I'm glad you've regained consciousness. Our tests show that your babies are safe. However, you have suffered second-degree burns. Recovery will take time. Thank you, doctor, Amy answered weakly. The police are here. When you're ready to talk about your condition, they would like to hear your testimony. Amy nodded sadly. She was trying to accept the reality that she would have to press charges against her mother and sister. The next morning, 2 detectives visited Amy's hospital room. Mrs. Watson, you've been through a terrible experience. Could you tell us about yesterday's events, as much as you're able? the female detective asked gently. Amy explained the day's events to the police in detail: the pregnancy announcement, Martha's anger, and the horrific assault. The two detectives took detailed notes. Martha Johnson and Victoria Clark have already been arrested. They are being held on suspicion of aggravated assault and harm to a fetus, the male detective explained. Several party attendees recorded the incident. The evidence is clear. After the detectives left, Richard returned to Amy's hospital room with a strange expression, a mixture of determination and sadness. He sat down and took a deep breath. "Amy, there's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "I haven't been honest about my family." The door opened, and an elderly man in an expensive suit entered. "Richard, it's time." "Amy, this is my uncle, Robert Morrison," Richard introduced. "He's one of the most famous lawyers in Boston and also our family's legal counsel." "The Watson family's legal counsel, to be precise," Robert corrected, nodding to Amy. "It's an honor to meet you, Amy. Richard has told me a lot about you." Amy looked at them both with a confused expression. "The Watson family. Legal counsel. Richard, what's going on?" Richard looked at his wife apologetically. "My family is wealthy. Quite wealthy. We're the founding family of Watson Pharmaceuticals." Amy's eyes widened in surprise. "Watson Pharmaceuticals. But why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted people to see me for who I am, not for my family's wealth," Richard explained. "And I wanted to live by my own means. I wanted to be a teacher and live a normal life. But now..." His voice hardened. "Now it's time to use that wealth and power to protect you and our children." Robert Morrison opened his briefcase containing documents. "In addition to the criminal charges against Martha Johnson and Victoria Clark, we will also file a civil lawsuit. We will seize all their assets and take legal measures to ensure they cannot harm you or your children in the future." "Is this revenge?" Amy asked quietly. "This is justice," Robert stated firmly. "And it's also protection to ensure they don't harm you or your children in the future." That afternoon, Richard's parents, Linda and Jonathan Watson, rushed from Boston. Despite their elegant and conservative appearance, Linda and the dignified Jonathan were surprisingly warm toward Amy. "You've made our son happy," Linda said, holding Amy's hand. "That alone makes you family. And now, you're giving us 2 grandchildren. Whatever your mother may be like, we will be your real family." Outside the hospital, the headline "Mother and Sister Throw Boiling Water on Pregnant Woman" was being reported in local news. Martha and Victoria's names and photos appeared on television and in newspapers, with widespread criticism and anger directed at their actions. Lying in bed, Amy gazed at the sunset outside her window. Her life had completely changed in just a few days. She had experienced terrible violence, learned the true nature of her mother and sister, and discovered her husband's secret heritage. She placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the 2 lives growing there. "I'll protect you," she whispered quietly. "And we will be strong. We'll get through this and become a better family." Richard returned to the room and sat beside her. "I can take you home tomorrow," he said gently. "After that, we'll make a new beginning." Amy smiled and held her husband's hand. Even in her pain, she felt hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was no longer alone. 2 months passed, and her burns gradually healed. The doctors repeatedly performed ultrasounds, confirming that the twin babies were developing normally. "They're both doing well," Dr. Johnson, the obstetrician, smiled and pointed at the monitor. "A boy and a girl. Wonderfully, there's absolutely no impact from that incident." "I'm so relieved," Amy cried. Richard also had tears in his eyes as he squeezed his wife's hand. "Your body is also recovering well," the doctor continued. "The burn scars will remain for a while, but they'll fade over time." Amy placed her hand on her belly, feeling the pulse of life within. "Their safety is my greatest healing." Martha and Victoria's trial was proceeding rapidly. Robert Morrison's legal strategy was relentless, and he had doctors, nurses, and witnesses to the incident give detailed testimony. In court, a decisive video recorded by one of the relatives attending the party was submitted as evidence. It clearly showed Martha pouring boiling water on Amy and Victoria, saying, "You finally got what you deserved." The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps. This act was not merely an outburst of anger, but a planned assault, the prosecution argued to the jury. The defendants used this opportunity to attempt to cause permanent harm to the victim and her unborn children. Amy's best friend Sarah also took the stand. Amy had been emotionally abused by her mother for years, Sarah testified in a trembling voice. Martha constantly criticized Amy and dismissed her successes. Meanwhile, her sister Victoria was praised for everything she did. Most shocking was the testimony of Victoria's husband, Jason. He seemed consumed by guilt. "My wife, after hearing about Amy's pregnancy," she said, "we need to find a way to end Amy's pregnancy. Our child should remain the only grandchild," he testified in a shaking voice. The day before the party, she was planning something with her mother on the phone. "I heard the words, 'how to stop her.' I thought it was a joke at the time, but..." His voice trailed off. Martha and Victoria's lawyers argued that the defendants' actions were the result of temporary emotional disturbance, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. While the trial proceeded, Amy and Richard purchased a new house with the Watson family's support. It was a beautiful two-story home with a spacious yard, and preparations for the twins' nursery were underway. "This house will be a new beginning for us and our children," Amy looked around the spacious living room. "It will be a place where they grow up safe and loved." At the courthouse, Judgment Day finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters. "Defendant Martha Johnson, you have been found guilty of aggravated assault and harm to a fetus," the judge said with a stern expression. "This court sentences you to 8 years in prison." Defendant Victoria Clark, you are sentenced to 5 years in prison as an accomplice. Additionally, they were ordered to pay a combined $5 million in damages. Amy quietly cried. This was a victory, but there was also sadness in her heart. The family was permanently divided, and her children would grow up never knowing their maternal grandmother or aunt. "All I ever wanted was just for them to love me," Amy quietly told Richard. A week after the sentencing, while Amy was having a regular checkup at the hospital, an unexpected visitor appeared. It was Victoria's husband Jason, carrying his 1-year-old daughter Lily. "May I talk to you?" he asked nervously. Amy nodded and invited Jason and Lily into the waiting room. "I'm proceeding with divorce from my wife," Jason explained. "But I want Lily to know her cousins. She's an innocent child. And I don't want her to grow up with hatred." Amy looked at little Lily. She had Victoria's eyes and smile, but there was no malice in her innocence. "Of course," Amy answered kindly. "Lily is always welcome. When our children are born, I'm sure they'll get along well." In this moment, Amy understood what true victory was. It wasn't revenge, but breaking the chain of hatred for the next generation. "I may not be able to forgive, but I'll move forward for the children," Amy resolved. "Lily is part of our family. She doesn't need to bear her mother's mistakes." Richard agreed and invited Jason and Lily for weekend dinners. New family bonds were beginning to heal old wounds. 5 years passed. In the garden of the Richmond Hills mansion on a beautiful summer day, children's laughter echoed. Amy and Richard's twins, Matthew and Sophia, were now 4.5 years old, playing energetically with Lily. "Matthew, throw the ball," called 6-year-old Lily. With her blonde hair tied in a ponytail, she had inherited her mother's beauty, but her character was gentle and thoughtful. "Here you go, Lily." Matthew answered cheerfully, throwing the ball. Amy watched them from the terrace while enjoying a warm cup of coffee. Faint burn scars still remained on her abdomen and thighs, but she was no longer ashamed of them. For her, they were proof of the trials she had overcome. "I'm glad the children get along so well," Jason said as he sat on the terrace. He had remarried, and a 6-month-old baby had been born to him and his new wife, Carol. "Lily looks forward to coming here every weekend." "We also look forward to having her," Amy smiled. "She's really a wonderful child." Richard came out onto the terrace with a pitcher of cold lemonade. "Jason, how are the recent consultations going?" he asked. Jason had started working as a legal advisor for the Watson Foundation, introduced by Richard. "They're going well. Last week's charity event was a huge success," Jason answered. "Amy's scholarship program is gaining a lot of support." Amy smiled as she gazed at the garden. She had used her tragic experience to establish a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence. Named Angel Wings, this foundation had helped hundreds of women and children over the past few years. "I'm planning to go to Manford Women's Prison next week," Amy suddenly said. Jason and Richard looked at her with surprised faces. "To see Martha?" Richard asked quietly. Amy nodded. "It's been 5 years. I have nothing to say to her, but she might have something to say to me." She took a deep breath. "And I feel like it's time to end something." The following week, Amy sat in the state prison's visitor waiting room. Her heart was pounding, but her expression was calm. The door opened, and Martha appeared in an orange prison uniform. 5 years of prison life had changed her. Her once confident demeanor was gone, and she looked old and tired. When she saw Amy, she stopped for a moment and opened her eyes wide. "Amy," Martha said in a trembling voice. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either," Amy answered quietly. Martha sat at the table and folded her hands. Her eyes were red, and her wrinkled face showed deep regret. "The children, are they well?" Martha asked timidly. "Yes, Matthew and Sophia are doing fine. They're growing into very bright and caring children," Amy answered calmly. "They get along well with Lily too." Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. I'm sorry," she said in a hoarse voice. "For what I did. I don't expect to be forgiven. But I wanted to apologize." Amy stared at her silently. She no longer felt hatred, but she wasn't ready to speak of forgiveness either. "I saw your picture in the newspaper," Martha continued. "The foundation you established. You're helping a lot of people. I want to make sure others don't go through what I did," Amy said. "I want to break the cycle of violence and hatred." Martha covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. "I was a terrible mother. I had a bad influence on Victoria too. She's still. She chose not to change," Amy said quietly. She had heard that Victoria had not improved her attitude in prison and remained isolated. "But that's not your responsibility. We all make our own choices." As visiting time drew to a close, Amy stood up. "I won't teach my children to hate you," she said. "They know that their grandmother made mistakes, but that's because she's human. No more, no less." Martha nodded as she wiped away her tears. "Thank you," That's more than enough. As Amy left the prison, Richard was waiting and embraced her. Are you okay? He asked gently. Yes, Amy smiled. I feel like I can finally let go of the past. That night, Amy was reading a bedtime story to the children in their bedroom. Matthew and Sophia were cuddled on her lap, and Lily sat in a chair, listening intently. And the brave girl decided not to defeat the scary dragon, but to talk to him instead, Amy read in a soft voice. She realized that the dragon was just lonely. And they became friends. Sophia asked curiously. Yes, gradually, Amy answered. Sometimes, it takes time to repair relationships. But what's important is to keep love and understanding. After putting the children to bed, Amy sat with Richard on the terrace, looking up at the starry sky. I'm truly happy to have you and the children, she said quietly. It's because you've been so strong that we have this family. Richard took her hand. Beyond the pain of the past, Amy had found true healing. It wasn't a perfect family or a perfect life, but genuine bonds centered on love and compassion.